It's hammer time, baby. Hello again, Strekquap. Do the sanctuary shake with constant stomps and leaps that make the ground quake. This is what the Quake Stomp Barbarian build for Diablo 4 is. Another ready for launch setup, my 25th ready for launch setup, and the final one I will do before the game launches because there's less than a week left and I've got a few other things I want to prepare before that. But the build is amazingly fun, at least on paper. It's all about using those heavy skills that make the ground shake, using those aspects that give you earthquake related things and earthquakes themselves. So there's leap attack, there's ground stomp, there's bash, and there is hammer of the ancients with certain added mechanics to it. We're also using Wrath of the Berserker, but we're not using the Berserk-related Keystone passive. We're actually using a different one. We're using the one that goes well with core skills, and it's a good choice in my opinion. I hope you like that. I hope it's to everyone's standard. I really wanted to do something different, something unique. I wanted to step into mechanics, into territory of the barbarian that the other builds haven't been. So I've used some skills that I haven't used much in the other builds, and I've used certain aspects I haven't used. So hopefully, it stands out on its own way compared to the others. I personally think on paper it's amazing and super fun. So buckle up, strike up, and I hope you enjoy the setup. So how does one do the sanctuary shake? What does the ground stomp build need? Well, first of all, you need bash. Ideally with combat bash. You need hammer of the ancients, ideally with furious hammer of the ancients, and tactical ground stomp, ideally, as well as tactical rallying cry. Since I'm using the unbridled rage or unbridled rage key passive, capstone skill. This means we will need more fury generation. That's why tactical for both defensive skills is a good fit. I'm also using a power leap, which again another good fit to keep generating fury. And I'm using some other things that depend on how much fury we have when we use the skill and stuff like that that you'll see later. Wrath of the Berserker is the ultimate I've picked. I didn't pick a weapon mastery skill. I mean, if I had an extra skill slot, I would prefer Steel Grasp, but there isn't anything I would feel sacrificing. I mean, sacrificing Rallying Cry doesn't seem reasonable to get Steel Grasp. So this is what the setup is like. Now let me quickly switch up to show you here again. This already shows the icons, so I no longer need to show the icons from here, I guess. But I need to switch to my spreadsheet so I can show you the back-to-back explanations of those skills and descriptions. First of all, combat bash. Obviously, it might be better to get battle bash for that extra little bit of fury generation, but I think it's not going to be that massive of a difference. Whereas combat bash would be perfect. Really striking 4 times with bash using two-handed weapon. Your next core or weapon mastery skill will overpower, guaranteed overpower, which is just perfect to make Hammer of the Ancients keep overpowering and to focus on the overpower. Keep in mind, this build has almost 500% overpower damage. That's excluding any overpower bonuses we get from items or any willpower, which also gives overpower that we get from items. So just from that, there's that 500%. So obviously overpower will be a big thing for us. For Furious Hammer of the Ancients, again, 1% multiplicative additional damage for each point of fury you had when using it. And when we start talking about the items, this will make so much more sense. We're also taking pressure point, which is perfect to make enemies vulnerable. We want to make enemies vulnerable as much as possible because it's super important on boss fights to keep them vulnerable because you can't crowd control them as often. Ground Stomp, again, the one with Fury Generation rather than the ultimate cooldown reduction. Tactical Rallying Cry again for the Fury generation and Fury regeneration. And then also imposing presence and martial vigor maxed out, I think, are perfect to get that extra life and to get that extra damage reduction. I haven't taken many sources of Fortify, but I hopefully have taken enough sources of Fortify for us to survive. And that extra maximum life does help with that. Again, Leap, I would rather, instead of slowing and crowd controlling, get that 40 Fury. That's a big chunk of Fury. If I'm not mistaken, that's, yeah, a little bit more than a full cast of Hammer of the Ancients. Now, I took Booming Voice, 3 points into Booming Voice. By the way, this one is different now. This one is now, it goes up to like 24% or something, 24% when maxed out. I'll have to update it to 8, 16, 24 on my side. There's Battle Fervor, there's Prolific Fury, maxed out again, pretty solid. This one to keep giving us Berserking, this one to give us the Fury generation while Berserking. And we have Pit Fighter, which is perfect for this type of build, extra survivability, and extra damage to close enemies. Then Slaying Strike, perfect for when the enemies are in their final little bits of HP left, to do some more damage to them. And moving on, we have, of course, Wrath of the Berserker with all the upgrades, and Heavy-Handed and Brute Force. For this build, Concussion and Wall would fit amazingly well, but I thought, okay, since I don't have as many points, I'd rather get Heavy-Handed, which would work even with the non-burgeoning weapon if we switch to certain skills using the non-burgeoning weapon, and the slashing and dual wielding and so on, and Brute Force, which works nicely. Also, Tempered Fury for that extra 9 maximum Fury is definitely a good decision. Unbridled Rage, again, 125% more damage with Hammer of the Ancients, but at 100% Fury cost, which means it will cost 70 as a base, excluding any cost reductions and stuff like that. Now, Bash requires Burgeoning, and Hammer of the Ancients requires two-handed Burgeoning, and additionally, for Bash we would want two-handed here, so those two skills will be two-handed Burgeoning, which means if you want to use your other types of weapons, Ground Stomp and Leap could help with that. Even Wrath of the Berserker, I guess. Now, when it comes to unique items, I have selected 1 plus another 4. Normally I would select 3 more, but this time I selected 4 more that could go well with the build. The main one that I would select going for would be the Grandfather, which is a two-handed sword with, obviously since two-handed sword it gives crit strike damage as a built-in, but it also gives increase your crit strike damage by multiplicative 60 to 100 depending on how good of a roll you get. And the other properties on this item can roll higher than normal. So it gives you damage, all types of damage. It gives you maximum life, it gives you all stats, and ignores durability loss. So all of those, maybe the bonuses that we see here are the higher than normal, or maybe they are on the base that will get boosted. In any case, it's a reasonable amount of stuff that we get from this weapon, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated. I think it's a very suitable choice of a unique weapon to get. Now, the other 4 ones that I could recommend are Melted Heart of Selig, which gives us maximum resource. And remember, Hammer of the Ancients could do more damage based on how much fury we had when we used it. But this also drains resource for every 1% of life you would have lost. That's why you want to have certain stuff like Fortify. You want some survivability there. This also gives you core skill damage, perfect for Hammer of the Ancient. It gives you resource generation, damage while healthy, and all stats. And these all stats will combine with those all stats, and it's perfect. And then there's another thing that gives us all stats, Harlequin's Crest, but it also gives us cooldown reduction, mind you. And again, more maximum life would stack with the Grandfather's maximum life, but most of all, it gives you damage reduction and to all skill ranks, all skills. And then there's also crafting material drop rate, which is the cherry at the top of the ice cream. It's perfect for Helltides. In Helltides, you get the Blood Fiend Robes, a crafting material that only drops there, and it's needed to upgrade past a certain rank of our items. So if you want to max out the upgrade rank of your accessories, weapons, etc., that are legendary, you do need to get Bloodfiend rolls, and this is the best way to farm. Even if you decide to use a different helmet, at least for Helltides, Harlequin's Crest is a must-have in the SWAT. Mother's Embrace, if a core skill hits 5 or more enemies, which we should have no problem doing with Hammer of the Ancients, especially when we modify it with some extra AoE shockwaves, 20 to 40% of the resource cost is refunded. Pretty solid, mind you, considering we're doubling the resource cost of Hammer of the Ancients. That means that would be a big chunk of resource refunded. This gives us crit strike chance, crit strike damage, overpower damage, and core skill damage. All of those are perfect top tier stats for our build. Armovatnis Magnum Opus is a one-handed sword with a very interesting mechanic. Skills using this weapon deal up to 0.7 to 1 times the increased damage. So 70 to 100% increased damage per. Oh no, 0.7 to 1 increased damage flat per point of fury you have. So the more the fury, the more that damage, and that damage would scale well with your own damage. But you have this added negative effect. You lose 2 fury every second. So this sword not for everyone, but if you think you can negate the 2 fury lost every second, then this is a great item to have. Considering you would need Hammer of the Ancients and Bash to be with a two-handed burgeoning, you won't be using this for that, but you could use it for leap. And we're using a legendary that makes leap do up to extra 200% more of its damage, which in the end turns out to be more than the actual damage of Hammer of the Ancients. Um, this is great. And again, damage with dual wielding weapons, damage to close enemies, physical damage, and up to 5% chance to restore 14 to 28% primary resource, which is pretty solid. Now that you know which unique items we're taking, things will make a little bit more sense in this legendary aspect slash powers segment. So in the helmet, you have Steadfast Berserker's aspect until you get the Harlequin's Crest, then obviously switch those out. Relentless Berserker's aspect goes in the amulet until you get the Melted Heart of Selig. Now here is a little twist. Aspect of Numbing Rat goes in the chest, but eventually gets replaced by the Exploiter aspect, which is currently in the gloves. And we want Exploiter aspect to make room in the gloves for the aspect of the Veteran Brawler, which would be in the swashing weapon, two-handed weapon, in the second weapon slot. But since we need to make room for the Grandfather, that's why we're moving those. So this one goes in the gloves, and from the gloves, the Exploiter goes in the chest. An aspect of Numbing Rat gets removed from the setup. Then for the pants, constant aspect of Bull Catus. In the boots, another constant aspect of Perpetual Stomping. In the gloves, we already told you. In the ring 1, Giant Strides, a very nice aspect. In the ring 2, we're using Berserk Fury, but it's getting eventually replaced by Mother's Embrace. In the main hand weapon slot, Earthquake aspect. In the off-hand weapon slot, until you get Ramawadni's Magnum Opus, I would suggest using aspect of limitless range. Rage, aspect of limitless rage. And weapon 1, a two-handed weapon 1, aspect of ancestral force is a constant. This is what each of them do. Let's go through that list. First of all, Ancestral Force is amazing. It gives us up to 32 to 50% additional damage as a quaking outwards effect for Hammer of the Ancient. So you hit the ground, it starts quaking in shockwaves going outwards for 32 to 50% of its damage. And since we're putting it in the two-handed slot, one of them, that means this 32 becomes 64, this 50 becomes 100%, which is solid additional damage. Earthquake aspect, ground stomp creates an earthquake, damaging enemies for X physical damage over Y seconds while standing in earthquakes. You deal X% multiplicative increased damage. Keep in mind, I don't know whether the Hammer of the Ancient stuff counts as an earthquake, but we have something that makes Leap create an earthquake. So this earthquake here should count for the earthquakes, standing in earthquakes bonus there. Limitless range, each point of fury you generate while at maximum fury grants your next core skill 1 to 2% multiplicative increase damage up to 15 to 30%. Each time a core skill deals direct damage to an enemy, your next charge or leap deals 15 to 20% multiplicative increase damage. This should get stacked multiple times, up to 225 to 400% multiplicative damage. And if you keep that, since we do in a two-handed weapon, this becomes from 225, it becomes 450 to 800% multiplicative damage. So 8 times the damage of Leap is definitely much more than Hammer of the Ancients' damage with up to 100% more of it as additional. Definitely an amazing thing to have. So yeah, Veteran Brawler, it will hurt losing it from here to put it in the gloves, but we are not losing it completely, and it's amazing stuff. And since Hammer of the Ancients could hit multiple enemies, that means you can get multiple stacks with a single hit. If you hit enough enemies, that would be just one hit, and then you would already have that leap. And since leap is so good, we want to reduce its cooldown. And Giant Strides helps here. Reduces the cooldown of leap by 3 to 5 seconds per enemy hit, up to a maximum of 9 seconds though. And you gain 3 to 6 fury per second while berserking temporarily until you replace this one. Then Relentless Berserker's aspect, another stuff that eventually gets replaced. It's pretty solid. Wacky hit damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to 22 to 40% chance to extend the duration of berserking by 1 second, double if it was a crit strike. Exploiter aspect, I love it in every single build. Not only does it give crowd control duration, which is nice, especially if you want to get a boss's break bar to build up faster, but then there's a 20 to 50% multiplicative increase damage to unstoppable enemies, which again, bosses in the majority of the time, if you're sowing them, will be unstoppable. Then Perpetual Stomping. It's such a great fit for this setup. Damaging an enemy with kick or ground stomp resets Leap's cooldown. So not only do we have cooldown reduction for Leap, we also have the reset of the cooldown. So the more leap, the more of this we get, and the more of this earthquake we get, which is leap creates an earthquake that deals and physical damage over 4 seconds. While standing in earthquakes, you gain increased damage. So this gives us increased damage, and this gives us increased damage while standing in earthquakes. And this earthquake for leap and the earthquake for ground stomp should stack up, in my opinion, and both of them should count for the other ones as an effect as an earthquake. A lucky hit, up to 35% chance to gain 45 whenever you deal damage while berserking. Again, something that we will use temporarily. It's good temporary aspect until the shakeout drops. And then Numbing Rat, each point of fury generated while at maximum fury grants 9 2x 45. And yeah, Numbing Rat, again, another thing that's temporary. For sockets at gems, some of the things are pretty obvious. For example, Emerald is probably the best to use on bosses because of the damage to vulnerable enemies. And since you can't crowd control a boss as much, that means Sapphire won't be as useful. Sapphire will be nice for mobbing, and so will be Emerald. I still prefer Emerald as the top priority. Something else that goes extremely well is overpower damage. So I would say Emerald and Ruby, tier number 1 for picks. Sapphire for weapons, maybe tier number 2. Skull, maybe tier number 3. For armor, Ruby is our best choice, tier number 1. And I wouldn't go Emerald. It's good to maybe use it temporarily. I wouldn't go. So this Emerald probably should be moved at the bottom or removed from this. Sapphire is also a nice thing because damage reduction while fortified. And if we play our cards right, we should be fortifying reasonably much. And then there is Skull, healing received. We do have some healing here and there, but again, top pick would be Ruby. And for the jewelry, diamond to all resistances bonuses, unless you want 2x element bonuses for whatever reason, if you're whacking a certain element. For the gear rolls, we're focusing on raw power as much as possible. I would recommend damage, crit strike chance, crit strike damage, overpower damage. Damage to vulnerable, crowd controlled, close enemies, where crowd controlled is lower priority than close, and lower priority than vulnerable. I think it would go like that: close, better priority than vulnerable, vulnerable, better priority than crowd controlled. But in general, overpower, crit strike chance, crit strike damage will be my priorities. Now, there are certain stats where you need to use keywords like the type of damage, physical, slashing, bludgeoning, skills, physical, slashing, bludgeoning damage. So you want crit chance, crit damage, damage with certain with those keywords. Another good set of keywords is the categories of skills, which priority goes to core, then brawling, then basic, then defensive skills. When it comes to crit chance, crit damage, and damage. When it comes to ranks, you want core, brawling, ultimate, basic, defensive, and shout. In this priority is what I would do for the ranks. For ranks to a specific skill, Hammer of the Ancients, priority number 1, Leap, priority number 2, Ground Stomp, 3, then Rallying Cry, and finally Bash. Obviously, we want Wiki Hit Chance. Again, this in orange on my website and in white over here in my spreadsheet is the higher priority. The lower priority here is in blue, here it is in golden. But I need to mention that the stuff at the top here is not necessarily better than the stuff at the bottom. Now, let's continue where we were. There are other good keywords such as elites. And yes, there's the type of damage like physical slashing, bludgeoning to elites. There's distractions with those types to elites. There's damage in general for X seconds after killing an elite, and the same goes for damage reduction after killing an elite. Um, and there's stuff like fortified generation, damage while healthy, damage while fortified, chance when struck to fortify, and there's overpowered chance. Interesting thing. I wonder if it's easy to get that one. There's overpowered damage with Hammer of the Ancients, Leap, Ground Stomp, Bash in this order of priority. Then overpowered damage with Core, Brawling, or Basic skills, this order of priority. And overpowered damage with bludgeoning, slashing, whatever. Pick whatever you like. Obviously, I would focus on two-handed bludgeoning or two-handed and bludgeoning bonuses. So this is not in order of priority. Maybe I should make it. So yeah, I hope this is clear. Again, the full list you can read on my website and on my spreadsheet if you forget anything. These are the boards, these are the skills. I'll go in detail through them. As usual, I have stage 1 and stage 2. This is stage 2. This is the final stage of what this build would look like when maxed out with all 20 extra points from Renown, so 220 Paragon points. This one is using less Paragon points. This is what I think it would look like around level 83 if you have 0 renown from 0 points from renown. But if you have all 20 points from renown, you should have this at level 78. You can see there's a ton of overpowered damage, almost 500. In fact, there is 516 overpowered damage up to. How do we get to this stage? Well, first of all, you start, of course, with the starting board. And you take this route here, taking the damage and HP on the way. Skipping this one, we don't need it right away. Eventually, maybe, but not really. Glyph socket. You're rushing to the glyph socket, taking strength, willpower, dex, strength, and boom, glyph socket ire. Ire gives you, when maxed out at rank 20, for every 5 strength purchased within range, you deal 7.2 increased damage while berserking. And you also take 10% reduced damage from elites while berserking if you meet the 40 strength requirement. Will meet and exceed this 40 strength requirement. Now, what I would do personally, I would start getting strength nearby that is easy to get. This one, 2 points right away. This one, 1, 2 points right away. This one, you need 1 dex point, but then you get 3 points of strength. That's what I would do. Some of you might want to prefer rushing to get all that physical damage and strength before taking the other strength bonuses, and that's fine. You can do that, but as long as you take all those points in strength that are around us for a total of 55, before moving on to the next board, this is fine. Remember, we can take 10 more strength here and 5 more strength here. But I did the maths, and eventually I found out it won't be worth it to take them. So originally I had them, then I removed them. So you won't be returning for those because for 15 strength you're wasting 5 points. So 5 points wasted for 3 times the 7.2 increased damage while berserking. So for 21.3 increased damage while berserking, 5 points is not worth it. I found better places to spend them, which you'll see later. The next board, you want to connect this Warbringer, but you don't need it for the Warbringer legendary. You need it because it has up to 49 decks within range for the socket. And the socket we want to get as soon as possible is Rat, which gives us for every 5 points of decks within range 16.44 increased critical strike damage. And additionally, if you meet the minimum, which you will, skills that critically strike generate Fury, which is extremely important for this build. So 2 good reasons to have it. And since there's some Fury related stuff on this side, you want to take this note before taking to the side. Whether you go this way from here to connect or that way, it's the same term in terms of points. It's still going to take you 6 points. But if you take it from here, then you're one step closer to reaching this Fury later in the second stage of the build. Now you go from here with that strength and then boom, dex, int dex, take the socket, and after that I would recommend going down. Physical damage, dex, physical damage, strength, dex, and physical damage. After you take this cluster, it's time to start filling up. So you could take this dex, strength, dex, then you can take this willpower, dex, strength, dex. And after that, you want to exit through this way again. It will be the same amount of points whether you go through here or through there. But if you go through there, you're closer to this maximum fury cluster, which later we want to take. Remember, the more maximum fury we have, the more damage Hammer of the Ancients will do for each point of fury we have when we cast it. Now we're connecting this to the next board, which is Decimator, which we will take. It works very well, especially if you're using the Grandfather for some of our skills, such as Leap. We need Burgeoning for our Bash. We need Burgeoning for our Hammer of the Ancients. But Leap could use a two-handed swashing. Leap could use the Grandfather weapon. And this would work nicely because it's only 5 points from the cluster to here. Now, how do you approach the cluster? With all that lovely 4 pieces of strength and 1 piece of willpower, and you enter through here. We want to put Dominate here. We want to get this overpower damage as early as possible. 28.8 for every 5 willpower. Additionally, if we meet the minimum bonus, which we will, if we don't overpower for 30 seconds, your next one will overpower. That additional bonus, we won't rely on it as much though. So you're entering from here, taking that willpower, int, willpower, danger to vulnerable, strength, socket. After you take the socket, you immediately get this willpower, and this willpower. Then go down. Vulnerable damage, strength, vulnerable damage. After that, you take damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, again with strength, and then those 2 points of willpower. And then it's time to move towards Decimator. So strength, willpower, boom, all the way to Decimator. And now it's time to exit this board. And that means you want to go through here and get that one. But since you're very close to this, it's worth grabbing vulnerable damage 3 times and damage to swashing 2 times and this hybrid point here. And at this point, you want to connect to the next board, which is Bonebreaker, but we don't use it for the Bonebreaker legendary. We use it because it contains 49 decks. And we want decks for territorial. We want that damage to close enemies to be the next a bunch of bonuses we get. Now you go through here so that you're close to that two-handed bludgeoning if you decide to go into it, because it also gives overpower and other good stuff there. So you go over here and you take dex, strength, boom, immediately the socket. At that point, you want to get any easy dex you can get, but there is only that one easy dex you can get. So you get that easy dex here, and next you get willpower, overpower damage reduction while healthy, this dex, this strength, this dex. Next you go on this side, intelligence, overpower damage, strength. Then you get this dex, and then you go willpower, dex, strength, dex. And at this point, you want to add the next board, which means this needs to be rotated. Extremely important piece of information. This board needs to be rotated. Right now, you have this pillage at the top. What we need to do is we need to get this pillage, instead of from the top, to be at the bottom. So you're rotating. We entered through here. This used to be here, and this used to be there. Well, now we're rotating it in a different way, flipping it. And we're doing that so that we can connect to this one called Carnage. So after you do that, after you've taken, as you can see, those bonuses here, go up there. What you do next is do this dex, strength, willpower, dex, get this physical damage, life. You don't take the extra life, you don't have the points to do so. Then you go over here and connect to Carnage. And the best way to enter it is through here, because on the way you're getting some very useful bonuses, which is Berserk duration, damage while berserking. Get that whole cluster, then strength, willpower, strength, and you're entering through this side. This needs to be exploit. An exploit requires dex. For every 5 dex, 7 points to increase damage to vulnerable. This board has 44 dex. The second best after the other two with 49 that we've already used. And it's solid because it has useful bonuses nearby that we benefit from. So once you enter through here, go dex, strength, glyph. At this point, you want to get the dex first. Dex, and dex. That's 4 points of dex right away. Then the next stuff you want to do is this damage while berserking dex, damage while berserking dex, and this damage while berserking and strength, and this damage while berserking. Then you can get stuff like damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, damage reduction from close enemies, strength, damage reduction from close enemies. Those are optional, those 4 points. If you think you don't need the strength and damage reduction from close enemies, you can skip it. Especially if you think you won't be meeting this extra secondary bonus, but I think it's worth it. Now, at this point, you also need to get this dex. So you go here, dex. And at that point, it's time to feel, to start feeling. There are useful clusters to get, like this damage while berserking and damage to elites. Another good cluster as a fewer that you could take, as I mentioned, there was this overpower damage here and damage with two-handed bludgeoning, but I think it's better to go for the Fury stuff. The Fury will give you solid gains, incredibly solid gains. So you take 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and then this whole Fury cluster, maximum Fury on kill, it's perfect. Then again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you take this one, skipping this HP, you don't need it, you need the points. And at this point, I was experimenting. Do I want those 21.3% of extra damage while berserking, or do I want to spend my points elsewhere? And I decided, okay, it's better to just do it there. Let's go this way. So you can get 45 generation, damage while fortified, damage while fortified, damage while fortified here, 45 generation and damage, regular damage to everything. And this is, thankfully, this is our second board, so it won't have such a high requirement to meet the bonus. So with this, just with this node, you get 20% damage and 45 generation on top. So this is almost as good as this one. And if we put the points here, we wouldn't have been able to take that one unless we remove points from other places. And at this point, the build is complete.
To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Struck up, keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.